When the A-League looked to expand its 10-team competition to 12 back in 2018, there was a wide range of interest from backers looking to get their team in. Some made a lot of sense, like Canberra, Wollongong, Tasmania, Gold Coast, even our good friends South Melbourne. Naturally, they all missed out. We ultimately got stuck with Macarthur, who had cut into an already represented market in Western Sydney, while Western United, representing Western Melbourne, promised to turn the sod on its privately backed stadium on the day it got its approval. And after 6 seasons, not a sod has been turned on that proposed stadium, with the club on the brink of a potential financial calamity as we speak. But we're not going to be talking about Macarthur and Western United. They've already had their own video discussing why they have been the worst expansion teams to join the A-League. No, but we're going to be talking about the worst expansion bid that never happened. It's been a bid that has been rightfully forgotten. Of course, we are talking about Southern expansion. It planned to incorporate 3 distinct and different areas spread out across 2 cities: the Illawarra, the Sutherland Shire, and the St George areas. It planned to play games across 3 different stadiums, with the most northern and southern grounds separated by more than 70 kilometres. It had the support of some of Australia's most credible media pundits at the time, which was, to be honest, quite disappointing. But it would have the financial backing of a wealthy Chinese property giant, which, just post the COVID-19 pandemic, was wound up and made insolvent. This is the story of the worst A-League expansion bid, Southern expansion. Before we dive into this video, I just want to say thank you for all the love that you've been showing our videos of late. I'd love it if you could like this video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps support us. You can also check us out on social media and Discord with the details in the video description. We also have channel memberships, which no obligation to sign up to that, but that's also another way you can support us. Let's get back to the video. Prior to the establishment of Southern expansion, the 3 regions of Wollongong, Sutherland and St George had previously been represented in the old NSL. Wollongong had the iconic Wollongong Wolves, who participated for 23 seasons and won back-to-back grand finals in 2000 and 2001, while Wollongong Macedonia competed in just the 1 season back in 1990-91. St George FC, founded by Hungarian immigrants in 1957, was in the NSL for 14 seasons and won the 1983 championship, back when the NSL had a first-past-the-post system. Sydney Olympic, who had previously played at Ashfield and Belmore, moved to Shark Park in the Shire for 2001-02 season and took on the name Olympic Sharks, but that move and name only lasted 2 seasons. The first rumblings of Southern expansion was announced back in March 2017. It would be backed by Chinese property giant Jianwan Group, the same group that was ultimately delisted from the Hong Kong Stock Exchange due to its inability to publish financial results, and it was given a court-ordered winding up orders. It would also be supported by SBS football pundits Craig Foster and the late Les Murray, with the pair to be joined by former Chief Executive of New South Wales PCYC Chris Gardner. Murray would be the chairman of the steering group, and the then 71-year-old believed the club representing the South Coast, St George and Sutherland Shire would heavily benefit the existing A-League clubs. Foster, who was appointed head of football, said the club would heavily focus on youth development. Foster said, "Parents will be pleased to know that in this club, females and males are equal, and our academy will include both boys and girls from the beginning at no cost to the players, and the region's juniors will have a direct pathway to their own A-League and W-League teams. Our shared vision is to become the strongest football region in the country, in every aspect: administration, infrastructure, development and professional success." Chris Gardner, who was the bid's chief executive, said along with the 3 associations, local football fans and the wider community would help shape the identity of the club and seek feedback on potential names and colours. Plans were in place to share games equally across the 3 regions. In the following months, former Matildas Di Alagich and Julie Murray were brought in as ambassadors for the proposed expansion team. By November 2017, former New South Wales Premier Maurice Yemmer was the new chairman of Southern Expansion's steering group, taking over from Murray, who had died in July that year. The bid even had the support of the NRL's Cronulla Sharks, who pledged their support for Southern Expansion in using their home ground of Shark Park. the only ground in any major professional sports league in Australia privately owned. While Southern Expansion was quickly developing an impressive portfolio of supporters, deals and financial backers, there was plenty of pushback from certain football groups, particularly Sydney FC and Football South Coast. It should be noted that the Wollongong Wolves were attempting to bid for one of the vacant spots in the A-League alone, separate from Southern Expansion. In June 2018, Sydney FC chairman Scott Barlow slammed the Southern Expansion bid, describing it as, quote, deeply flawed, and claiming it would cannibalise his club's fan base. Instead, Barlow threw his support behind the Macarthur bid, despite a Campbelltown-based bid having the potential to cannibalise the Western Sydney Wanderers, a rival of Barlow's own club. Gardner said Barlow's claims were ridiculous. Gardner said, Mr. Barlow comes from a great Australian tradition of protectionism and monopoly. Clearly he's panicking about the prospect of a strong A-League competitor based in the southern region. We have offered Sydney FC and the Wanderers a collaborative approach to market growth and membership drives in the Sydney area once we are established. The Wanderers were very open. Sydney FC dismissed it. When the Wanderers were created, Sydney also fought against it, so the football community knows they have form. However, Sydney FC's memberships actually rose. This is what healthy competition does. Of course though, it was no surprise that the Wanderers would have been open to the Southern Expansion bid, because Southern Expansion wouldn't directly affect its supporter base. But there is no doubt that Southern Expansion would have affected Sydney FC's. In a stunning turn of events, in July 2018, Football South Coast, who had previously supported the Southern Expansion bid, was now throwing its support behind the Wollongong Wolves bid, who was separately bidding for a spot in the A-League, in opposition to Southern Expansion. Then chairman of Football South Coast, Eddie DeGabriel, said the board's preference had always been for a standalone club in the top flight, and he said the board looked forward to working with the Wolves. Former Socceroo and Wolves bid spokesman, Luke Wilkshire, said the partnership was crucial to the club's ambitions. But the Wolves were dealt a final blow when it was cut from the A-League expansion process in October 2018, leaving just 6 bids in the running: Macarthur, Western Melbourne, Team 11, South Melbourne, Canberra and Southern Expansion. The Wolves didn't take it well, and a bit of Cold War ensued between the Wollongong Club and Southern Expansion. In November 2018, just weeks before a decision was to be made on the final 2 expansion spots, Sydney FC announced a new partnership with the Wollongong Wolves. The new partnership would see the Wolves basically becoming a feeder club for the Sky Blues, solidifying the long-running relationship between the two teams and granting the Wollongong NPL club's juniors access to Sydney's elite programs. Former Sydney FC defender and current Wolves head coach Luke Wilkshire put it bluntly, I'd go as far as to say that Southern Expansion are not really welcome in Wollongong. On top of the new partnership with the Wollongong Wolves, Sydney FC also noted that there were similar arrangements in place with the associations of St George and Sutherland, 2 other areas that Southern Expansion was targeting. Days later, Southern Expansion used a press release of their own to try and take some credit for the 19,000 strong crowd that saw Sydney FC defeat Melbourne Victory 2-1 at Kogarah. A move CEO Danny Townsend, yes, that very same Danny Townsend that is so beloved within the A-League community, described as pretty embarrassing in an interview with SBS. But on Thursday, December 13, 2018, all that petty fighting between Wollongong, Sydney FC and Southern Expansion were over. All the deals and goodwill Southern had tried to pull over the past year and a half was all for nothing. The A-League announced it would be expanding to Macarthur and Western Melbourne. Football would not be going to the southern areas of Sydney and Wollongong. And that brought an end to the A-League's worst expansion idea. But why didn't this bid work? They might think that combining these 3 areas might actually work. Well, from someone that grew up in Sydney, I can tell you an idea like that is just absolutely ridiculous. We've got to think that Wollongong and Sydney are actually 2 separate cities. And the idea of trying to connect a team across 2 cities is absolutely absurd, particularly in a sport that prides itself on its tribalism and connection to community. The St George area and the Illawarra areas have already merged together to form the St George Illawarra Dragons in the NRL, and that's been a merge that hasn't been particularly well loved. All the old Illawarra Steelers fans begrudgingly go for St George and would love the opportunity to support their own standalone team in the NRL. And let's have a look at the Shire. It's a very proud and patriotic area of Sydney, and they would only want to be supportive of their own team that would play all their games in the Shire. The idea and thought of trying to have a semi-Shire team playing games in Kogarah and Wollongong as well would just be absurd and would be rejected by the Shire folk. I think what was worse about this whole expansion bid as well was the fact that well-known credible media pundits in Craig Foster and the late Les Murray were supportive of this bid. These were two people, I look up highly to in terms of football opinion, and I still do. But the fact that they supported a bid like this, it didn't feel right to me that they wanted to support a bid that was just so, in a way, anti-football, trying to represent so many different areas. But I think we can kind of understand why the bid wanted to expand so many areas. During this whole process, A-League expansion process, David Gallop and the FFA had made it pretty clear that they were only trying to look at areas that incorporated at least 1 million people. So by pulling together St George, Sutherland Shire and Wollongong, you're getting pretty close, that 1 million people. Now, how would a Southern expansion team have compared to the likes of Macarthur and Western United? Well, we already touched in the video that the backers of Southern expansion wound up just after the end of the COVID-19 pandemic, so the money's gone there already. And how would the Southern expansion bid have stacked up against Macarthur and Western United? Well, I think for all the criticism Macarthur gets, and I think most of it is rightful, Macarthur was very clear in the area it was trying to represent. That Campbelltown, Macarthur, that growth area around in southwest Sydney. Western United, for all their flaws, and there's a lot of those flaws, and who knows, by the time this video comes out, there might be another week that has gone by where they have not paid their players. I think Western United was trying to do a good thing by trying to represent a certain area that was not represented in the A-League. Now, I think a Southern expansion bid based in the Shire actually probably wouldn't have been a super bad idea. I think one based in St George would have, because I think it takes in a lot of the Sydney FC membership area. I think what should have been the obvious option was just to have the team based in Wollongong, an area that's got a proud tradition in the old NSL, into developing so many great Socceroos over the years. Scott Chipperfield is probably one of the most notable players. I just think the idea of just trying to incorporate three very distinct areas of Sydney and Wollongong just would have been an utter failure, and it just long-term could not have worked, even if all the financial side of things worked out. So in the end, I think the decision not to go with Southern expansion was the right decision, even though we ended up with Macarthur and Western United. Anyway, that brings to an end today's video. Thank you for once again tuning in and watching our videos. We've been getting some great support on the channel over the past year as we have started to dive more into video essays. Really appreciate the support. Once again, if you can like the video, subscribe to the channel. Of course, we have channel memberships that you can check out too. No obligation, like I said before, no obligation to do that, but it's a great way to support us as well. But anyway, until next time, we'll see you in the next video.